Pawn Stars boss Rick Harrison finds the first ever Superman doll really cool but fails to buy it. When Rick Harrison, the sharp-eyed and seasoned proprietor of the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, stepped into the world of comic book collectibles, he did so with the same mix of curiosity and skepticism that has defined his decades-long career on the hit History Channel show Pawn Stars. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor and keen eye for historical value, Rick has appraised everything from vintage firearms to rare coins, Civil War relics to classic automobiles. But on one particularly memorable day, he encountered something that, while not quite fitting the traditional mold of historical artifacts, carried with it a cultural weight that even he couldn't ignore: the first ever Superman doll. The item arrived at the pawn shop not with fanfare, but rather with the quiet confidence of someone who believed they had stumbled upon something truly rare. The seller, a middle-aged man named Greg Thompson, had inherited the doll from his late uncle, a lifelong comic book enthusiast who had collected memorabilia from the golden age of comics. Greg wasn't a collector himself, but he had done enough research to know that what he was holding might be worth more than just sentimental value. Wrapped carefully in a protective plastic case and housed in a vintage wooden box, the Superman doll was a sight to behold. Dressed in a hand-stitched red and blue costume with a flowing yellow cape, the figure stood about 12 inches tall, its face molded into a determined expression that captured the essence of the Man of Steel. The doll's features were unmistakably from the 1930s aesthetic: simple, bold, and iconic. Most striking, however, was the label on the bottom: 1938 Detective Comics Incorporated. This was not a reproduction or a later reissue. It was an original, possibly the first commercially produced Superman doll ever made. Rick Harrison, flanked by his team, including his longtime associate Austin "Chumley" Russell and appraiser Corey Harrison, no relation, approached the item with cautious interest. While Rick had dealt with comic books before, most notably a rare issue of Action Comics, which introduced Superman to the world in 1938, he had never seen a three-dimensional representation of the character from that era. Dolls and action figures, while collectible, often don't carry the same weight as original artwork or print issues. But this was different. This wasn't just a toy, it was a piece of pop culture history. "That's really cool," Rick said, peering at the doll through the plastic case. "I mean, Superman, the first superhero, and this might be the first doll ever made of him. That's actually kind of a big deal." Chumley, ever the comic book fan, leaned in with wide eyes. "Dude, this is like the holy grail of superhero merch. If this is real, it could be worth a fortune." Rick nodded slowly, but his mind was already calculating. He knew that authenticity would be the key. The comic book and collectibles market is rife with reproductions, fakes, and misleading claims. A doll like this, if genuine, could be worth tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction. But only if it could be verified. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a pop culture historian and memorabilia expert based in Los Angeles. With over 20 years of experience authenticating vintage toys and comic-related items, Dr. Marsh was known in collector circles for her meticulous research and no-nonsense approach. After a thorough examination checking the materials, stitching, paint composition, and manufacturer markings, Dr. Marsh confirmed what Greg had suspected. The doll was indeed from the late 1930s and bore all the hallmarks of an early licensed Superman product. More importantly, she found documentation in the archives of DC Comics that referenced a limited run of cloth dolls produced in 1939 as promotional items for the Superman newspaper comic strip. "This is extremely rare," Dr. Marsh explained during her assessment. "Only a handful of these were ever made, and most were lost or destroyed over time. There's no record of one ever appearing on the open market. If this is the first one discovered, it could be the most valuable Superman toy in existence." Rick listened intently, his expression unreadable. To the casual observer, he seemed calm, but internally, he was running the numbers. The doll's value, according to Dr. Marsh, could range from $75,000 to $150,000 at auction, depending on provenance and buyer interest. For a pawn shop that typically deals in items valued in the thousands, this was uncharted territory. Greg, sensing the gravity of the moment, named his price, $90,000. Rick raised an eyebrow. $90 grand, that's a lot of money for a doll. "It's not just a doll," Greg countered. "It's a piece of American history. Superman changed everything. This is the first time he was brought to life in 3 dimensions. That's worth something. Rick paced for a moment, rubbing his chin. He knew the risks. The shop didn't often deal with items of this magnitude. The overhead, the insurance, the security, everything would have to be considered. And while the potential profit was enormous, so was the potential loss if the market shifted or if new evidence emerged to challenge the doll's authenticity. Moreover, Rick had built his reputation on buying low and selling smart. He wasn't in the business of holding on to high-value collectibles unless he was absolutely certain of the return. The pawn shop model relied on turnover, not long-term investment. "I'll give you $60,000, Rick finally said. Greg shook his head. "I can't do that. I've already had interest from a private collector in New York. He offered $85,000. I came here because I wanted to see what you thought, but I'm not looking to lowball this." Rick sighed. He respected that. In his world, knowing your worth was half the battle. He had seen too many people sell treasures for pennies on the dollar out of desperation or ignorance. Greg wasn't desperate. He was informed. And that made him a tough negotiator. "I get it," Rick said. "And I'll be honest, I think this is an incredible piece. It's really cool. But $60,000 is as high as I can go. We don't move items like this every day. The risk is too high." The room fell silent. Chumley looked disappointed. Corey shook his head slightly, as if to say. Greg considered the offer. He knew Rick's reputation. He knew that the gold and silver pawn shop had sold rare items before, including a Confederate $100 bill and a moon rock. But this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. "I appreciate the offer," Greg said finally. "But I think this belongs in a museum or with a serious collector who'll preserve it. I'm going to hold out." Rick extended his hand. "Fair enough. Best of luck with it." And just like that, the first ever Superman doll left the shop as mysteriously as it had arrived. In the days that followed, Rick couldn't stop thinking about the doll. He discussed it with Corey over lunch, replayed the appraisal in his mind, and even looked up recent auction results for vintage comic memorabilia. A 1940s Batman figurine had sold for $42,000. A prototype Green Lantern ring from the 1960s went for $68,000. But nothing compared to the potential of the Superman doll. "I should have gone higher," Rick admitted to Corey. "Maybe $70,000. I just didn't want to overextend." Corey shrugged. "You did what you had to do. That kind of money. It's not just about the item. It's about the risk. If it turned out to be a fake, or if the market crashed, we'd be stuck with it." Rick nodded. He knew Corey was right. Still, there was a pang of regret. Not because of the money, but because of what the doll represented. Superman wasn't just a character. He was a symbol. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster in 1938, Superman was the first superhero, a beacon of hope during the Great Depression, a champion of truth and justice in a world that often lacked both. The doll, in its simple, handcrafted way, was a tangible connection to that moment in history. It was the beginning of an entire genre, the spark that ignited decades of comic books, movies, TV shows, and cultural icons. To hold it, even briefly, was to touch the origin of modern mythology. Weeks passed. The shop returned to its usual rhythm, buying guitars, selling vintage watches, haggling over old military gear. But the Superman doll lingered in Rick's mind. Then, one afternoon, a news alert popped up on his phone. Rick read the article with a mix of awe and resignation. The doll had been authenticated by DC Comics' own archives team and sold to a private collector in California. The sale made headlines in pop culture circles, with experts calling it a landmark moment for comic memorabilia. "That's it," Chumley said, reading over Rick's shoulder. "We missed out on history." Rick smiled faintly. "Yeah. But you know what, I'm okay with that." And he meant it. In a world where value is often measured in dollars and cents, Rick Harrison has always understood that some things are priceless. The thrill of the hunt, the story behind the object, the human connection forged in the negotiation, these are the real treasures of the pawn business. The Superman doll wasn't just a collectible. It was a reminder of how stories shape us, how heroes inspire us, and how even the simplest objects can carry the weight of generations. Rick may not have bought it, but he had seen it. He had held a piece of the dawn of the superhero era in his hands. And for a man who has spent his life surrounded by history, that was enough. In the end, the doll found its rightful place not in a glass case behind a pawnshop counter, but in the hands of someone who would cherish it, preserve it, and pass on its story. Listening to people's stories, appraising their treasures, and sometimes letting the extraordinary walk out the door. Because in the world of pawn stars, not every item needs to be bought to be valued. Some are simply meant to be remembered. As the sun set over the Las Vegas Strip, casting a golden glow on the gold and silver pawnshop sign, Rick stood at the counter, flipping through an old comic book a customer had just traded in. It was a 1952 issue of featuring the first team-up between Superman and Batman. He smiled. Heroes come and go, but their legacy, that's forever. And so, in his own way, is Rick Harrison's. Though he didn't buy the first ever Superman doll, he recognized its significance. He treated it with respect. He let it go with dignity. And in doing so, he became, in his own quiet way, a kind of hero too. Not a caped crusader, but a guardian of history, one pawn at a time.